Hello, Nick, and welcome. It's very nice to have you here today. And I'm very happy that you accepted to have this little talk about your book. And well, I'm very happy to see you and to meet you, sort of. So welcome to, Romania, let's say.
Yeah, hi Magda, and yeah, hi everyone in Romania. Thank you very much for having me. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So, well, your book, it's The Cat and the City. It's your debut novel. It appeared last year, right, in the summer of 2020, if I'm not mistaken. And, well, it was very well received, as far as I know. And, well, it's been translated already, or it is being translated in into how many languages? Like 10, I think.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And well, Romanian is one of them. And Humanitas Fiction, we're very happy that Humanitas Fiction decided to have it translated. So let me start by asking you a very, if you want, general question. It's The Cat and the City. We see the title. What should we expect if we open the book?
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question. I think the first thing I would say is that most readers expect it to be about the cat. And I would say that it's not so much about the cat, but it's more about the characters who the cat encounters on her travels through the city. So that's the first thing I would say, is that there is a lot of cat in the book, but it's not primarily about the cat, it's more about the people. So I would say that in the word the cat and the city, it's more about the inhabitants of the city, or the city as a kind of living, breathing thing. Yeah. The other thing I would say is that when you first start reading the book, you might think that it's short stories, but as you progress through the book, it starts to become more apparent that they're actually all interconnected, and it is actually more like a novel that's made up from lots of stories. Yeah.
Yes, right. So not quite the usual novel that we have in mind when we hear the word novel. Yes. And actually, yes, it's true. I read some of the comments, that your readers have on the internet, and indeed, you're right. Some of them said, "Well, it's not about cats, as we expected." Indeed. So, as I said, not quite the usual novel, both in terms of form, if you want, and in terms of content somehow. Yeah. As you said, there are short stories connected, but not in such an obvious way. So we need to work a little bit to make the connections. And it's also the content itself. I think the novel itself looks like a kaleidoscope, if you want. So every time we look at it, we see the image being composed, differently from the same elements. In the end, it's the people and the city, or the people in the city. So let me ask you, if this kind of, fragmented image, does it match better the nature of the city you are referring to? We haven't actually told our readers what city we are talking about.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So the city in my book is Tokyo. And yeah, I think one of the reasons why I wanted to structure the book this way was that I thought that it was cities are complicated places because they contain people from all different walks of life, people doing very different things, living very different lives. So I thought I've always wanted to write about my time living in Tokyo. And I thought that the best way to write about it was more of a kind of multi-perspective, multi-voiced narrative, because then that allowed for different views of the city. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. Well, it is indeed. Tokyo is special, if you want. So you do have a Japanese experience. Well, Tokyo is fascinating. Yeah. So talking about this fascination, where does this fascination for Tokyo come from? Why is Tokyo so fascinating for everybody who goes there and who gets in contact with it? What makes this, different or special from other cities?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's lots of different answers to that question as well. I'd say in some ways, Tokyo in this case, I think it's a lot like a lot of other big cities. So I don't think it's entirely unique in that sense. I mean, obviously, Tokyo does have its own kind of flavor, but I think the story could have been set in another big city like New York or Bombay or anywhere in the world, really. I think a big city. So I think the novel deals with themes that you can find in any city. I think, though, talking about my own personal fascination with Tokyo, I think that when I first moved to Japan, I was living in rural Hiroshima, and I lived there for a long time, and I really loved it. And I would say that experience was more like living in Japan, whereas I always dreamed of moving to Tokyo and working in the city. But when I moved to Tokyo, I found that Tokyo was so massively different to my life in the countryside in Japan that, and funnily enough, I found it actually quite isolating, quite cold, quite a sad place in a lot of respects. And I think that's why I became fascinated with it. I wanted to write about people who were struggling, who were leading lives that were kind of quiet and desperate. And I think my time in Hiroshima was so fun and it was so lovely, but I don't think I got much in terms of writing out of it because I was too content. I was too happy. So I think that's where my fascination with Tokyo sort of crept in. Yeah.
Do you think that people with a Japanese background will, will welcome or will find the book, the story, they will see it differently from people without a Japanese background? What about the readers, who will read the book?
That was actually the hardest thing about writing the book, because I know originally I wrote it with a UK audience in mind. I'm really happy that it's been translated into other languages. I'm actually completely shocked and really overwhelmed and happy that it's going into other languages. But originally my thought was that I had to write the book so that it was accessible to people in Britain or in America who weren't familiar with Japan. So I didn't want it to be too overwhelming in terms of the content. But then I was also aware that there are a lot of people who are, I include myself in this, who are very interested in Japan and do read, works of fiction or non-fiction by non-Japanese writers. And I myself am very critical when I read these books. So I knew that there would be readers who were very, very familiar with Japan. And I knew that I didn't want them to get bored. I didn't want them to think, oh, I know this. So I also wanted an element of the book to be entertaining and to be, informative for people who were also familiar with Japanese culture or Tokyo. So that was actually one of the hardest things. Do you use the original Japanese word? Do you translate it? Do you explain it? And that was one of the things I really struggled with writing the book. I hope that it reads okay and that but it's one of the things I still struggle with. And I think that's why I had a chapter that was a translated story from Japanese to English. And I also had a character who is a translator, so she's American. And I think that really helped sort of transition the readers who weren't familiar with Japan. Yeah.
Now, because I talked about authenticity somehow, you use a lot different, many genres in your novel. It's not just the story, the novel. You also have manga, so manga lovers will find something interesting there as well. We have even haiku, you have all these case notes, real photos, uploaded somehow, in the book. So you don't only have the story, you also have all this non-verbal part, like the drawings and photos. What about them? Do they bring an extra element of authenticity to expressing Japanese realities? Do Japanese realities need that non-verbal, if you want, visual element to be expressed? Aren't words enough? Aren't words enough for Japan?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it all sort of stems from my very diverse interests. So I've always had this kind of strong opinion that we shouldn't divide up books in a library or in a bookshop, and I've never seen the point in putting the science fiction over here and the crime fiction over here. So I suppose that I'm quite a contrary person, so I thought, well, I want to write a book that contains elements of all of these different genres. I want a ghost story. I want, a detective story. So I wanted all of these elements so that essentially, if someone were trying to categorize where the book should go, they wouldn't be able to put it anywhere so that was something I wanted to do. And I think at the same time with storytelling, I'm also very keen on different kinds of storytelling. And I think that, it being my first novel, I wanted to play around and try different things. So yeah, making part of it manga it was also fun for me to do that. I really enjoyed that adding that extra dimension of storytelling. And because it tied in with one of the characters' journeys, his wanting to be a manga artist, I felt like it wasn't gratuitous. It actually thematically fit in with the story. But yeah, I think that's sort of why I went for such a varied approach. And I think it also kind of tied in with what I was saying earlier about the multi-perspective, multi-voice nature of the city. Yeah.
So, yeah, it is indeed, a fascinating book. Yeah, you finish reading it and it's like, wow, I had so many things here. And the characters also, there are many characters, like each story comes with its own characters. So I would sort of avoid asking you about the main character of the novel. Well, maybe we have one, but I'm not sure it's human. And it's not the cat, probably. But there are, you have very powerful characters, some powerful characters there. And well, I'd like to ask you a couple of things about some of them. And I would start with one that appears in the first story. That's Naomi, the girl. Not quite the usual, again, Japanese young woman that we have in mind, our stereotypical image about a Japanese girl or a Japanese young woman, starting with her physical appearance. Yeah, she has green eyes. You don't quite expect that in a Japanese. Is she, of course, people who are familiar with Japanese literature might have already thought of another Naomi in the Japanese literature. That's Junichiro Tanizaki's Naomi, the modern girl. Are they related, even remotely? Or is it just a coincidence?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Tanizaki is one of my heroes. I love his books, so I couldn't help but put in a character who shared the name with Naomi from his book Chijin no Ai, which is translated as Naomi in English.
Naomi.
Yeah. How's it translated in Romanian?
It's not. I don't think it has. It was translated in. It's not yet translated in Romanian. So.
Yeah, I hope it gets translated. It's a fantastic book.
It is indeed.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No. Yeah, so there are some I don't know, connections between you and the Japanese literature as well.
Yes, very much. So I would say that I wasn't just influenced by my time living in Japan, but my time reading in Japan. And Japanese literature was something that I really fell in love with, and it's been a huge inspiration to my writing as well, I think. So there are, I've hidden lots and lots of clues to some influences, some Japanese literature influences in the book. So yeah, you've picked up on one of them, which was Naomi. Yeah.
Well, Tanizaki is also a big cat lover, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
that was easy. That was an easy one, let's say. Okay. Right, and you also have Flo, the translator, who is a foreigner also. And well, you actually touch on various aspects of the Japanese, of the contemporary Japanese society. And well, the condition of the foreigner is actually one of them. We have several foreigners there struggling with their life and work in Japan. You have also, of course, you have the traditional Japan that we all know with sakura and momiji and the festivals. But all these traditional images are sort of more like of a background, right? Against which other things are happening. It's like a vanishing world somehow. Is it? In your book, is traditional Japan disappearing?
That's a really good question, because when people talk about my book, sometimes they say, "Oh, this is a book about Japan," but I would say it's a book about Tokyo. And I don't know, it's difficult because, I mean, take, for example, Tanizaki himself is an interesting person because he was born in the Kanto area, and he was, when he was growing up, he was very much into the young, like fashionable Western things, like, but then he got to a stage where he decided he would move to Kansai, and he lived in between Osaka and Kobe in a place called Ashiya. And he went down there because he was going on a quest to find real Japan. He wanted to look back at the older culture and the older history. And I think this book that I've written is looking at modern life. It's looking at contemporary Tokyo's life, basically. But that's not to say that I'm not interested in the traditional side of Japan. I think it's just because I set the book in Tokyo, I had to try and make it representational of Tokyo life. But I find this is interesting because people often say, what is the real Japan? And I've been on kind of literature panels where people are talking about that. And, some people say like Murakami is not a very Japanese writer, but I struggle to see why he isn't, because the way he depicts lifestyle is often far more true to the lifestyles that people say living in Tokyo are leading than people out in the rural communities. And one of the things, I think when I was living in Tokyo, I was spending a lot of time traveling to the rural parts of Japan. And I saw that contrast a lot, the contrast of the traditional and the old way of life with the modern way of life. And in some ways, I found the modern way of life maybe slightly unhealthier in terms of isolation and in terms of loneliness and things like that. And I think I wanted to explore those themes. So yeah, I do think you're right, definitely, that in say modern Tokyo, that the traditional way of life is kind of vanishing. Yeah.
And you talk to us in your book about all these aspects of the Japanese society, like not the very pleasant and beautiful ones. You also have the ones that usually the Japanese are trying to hide from the eyes of the foreigner. And here you are, a foreign writer. You are the foreigner, sort of exposing them, disclosing them to us, to the other writers. So because we're getting closer to the end of our interview, I would ask you, how do you see the role of the writer now, or the role of the foreign writer, if you want, to be more specific in this equation? You have reality with a society with its problems. It's the old question, where does the writer stand, but where does the foreigner writer stand now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure. I'm also really wary of saying what writers should be or shouldn't be. I'm kind of very laissez-faire with that. I think writers should be whatever they want to be. But I think, though, one of the interesting things, and I'm very interested in people who who move to Britain, say, and write about Britain, I think sometimes a different perspective is what makes things interesting. So it's not necessarily, it doesn't even have to be like being a foreigner or something like that. But I mean, me personally, I wasn't born in Britain. I was born in Germany, and I've spent my life moving around a lot. So I've always kind of felt like an outsider. And I think there are lots of writers all over the world who have a similar kind of background. I saw recently on Twitter the writer, her name is Yumiri. She wrote a book called Tokyo Ueno Station. So she's a Korean, she's of Korean ancestry, but was born in Japan and speaks Japanese and writes in Japanese. But I saw her tweeting something along the lines of, I'm not Japanese, I'm not Korean. The absence of nationality is the very foundation from which I write. And maybe that's something in me. Maybe that's why I wanted to become a writer, because I didn't ever feel like I belonged. So maybe writers gain some kind of perspective by not belonging or feeling like outsiders.
And well, let me just ask you a final question. It has been said that your novel is a declaration of love to Japan. Yeah. On the other hand, when I read it, I think I actually told you at some point, I felt it more like a sort of exorcism. You're trying to exorcise the demons in a way, not necessarily like a cathartic experience, but maybe closer to that. Well, which one is it? Is it a declaration of love? Is it exorcism? Or I don't know. Do we love our Japanese demons? Which one is it?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question to answer. I think in a kind of sneaky way, it's both. And I've been thinking about this nature of love. And is something a true love if you don't acknowledge everything about it, its flaws included? So is it true love? Do people really love Japan if they only like manga and anime, which are not the reality of Japan? Or, you know, if you want to love something, do you need to look at it deeply and examine it entirely? I think you can still love something by acknowledging that it's not perfect, because nothing in life is perfect. And I think pretending that something is perfect is not quite love, it's more like delusion. So yeah, I would say that it definitely is a love letter to Japan, and it definitely was cathartic for me.
So thank you very much, Nick. And well, looking forward to seeing you in Romania one day.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. And also, Magda, thank you very much for your incredible hard work translating the book. I really appreciate that.
It was really a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much.